This is the second week of our 6-week study of the element of space. Space in a work of art refers to a feeling of depth or 3 dimensions. If an object only appears to have height and width, we call it 2-dimensional. The third dimension is depth. If we can add depth to our art, we will have created the illusion of space or 3 dimensions. Last week, we focused on overlapping. Overlapping in art is the placement of objects over one another in order to create the illusion of depth. We want to continue to use overlapping throughout this 6 weeks as we study ways to create space. This illustration came from a website called thevirtualinstructor.com, and many of the other illustrations we'll be using throughout this unit will come from that same website. The method of creating space that we will be focusing on this week is placement. Placement on the paper means objects that are placed higher within the picture plane will appear farther away. Objects that are placed lower in the picture plane will appear closer to us. Another way to look at placement is to define and identify the foreground, middle ground, and background of a picture. Look at these 3 examples. You will notice that in every case, the foreground is closest to the bottom of the paper, middle ground is right in the middle of the paper, and the background is closest to the top of the paper. They're showing you here that things on the bottom of the paper appear closer to us. When we get to the middle, it seems a little bit further away. When we get to the background, it's the farthest away from us. Often, when we look at placement as a method of creating space in art, talking about the foreground closest to us, the middle ground in the middle of the paper, and the background farthest away from us, we're talking about a landscape, like we have in the picture at the top left. Landscape meaning it's an outdoor scene. You don't necessarily have to do that though. If you look at the pool table, you'll also notice it has a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. The pool cue itself, where it's closest to us, that would be the foreground. The pool balls in the middle would be middle ground, and then the background of the picture where it's off of the pool table and it's just the black area, that would be the background. So don't limit yourself to having to use a landscape for this assignment. You could do a landscape if you want to, an outdoor scene, but there are also ways, such as the school picture, to show placement as your development of space without using a landscape. So your assignment for this week is to create a piece of art that shows you understand placement. The idea that things closest to the bottom of the paper are closest to the viewer, and things on the top of the paper are farthest away from the viewer. You get to decide what subject you want to use for your artwork. I'm not telling you what your artwork has to be about. I'm just saying it needs to have the 3 distinct areas of foreground, that's at the bottom of the paper and it's closest to the viewer, middle ground, somewhere in the middle of the paper, and it is just what it sounds like, it's middle ground, and then background, which should be at the top of your paper, farthest from the viewer. You can do a landscape. I think all of the videos that I'm adding this week are probably landscapes because that's the easiest thing to show you foreground, middle ground, and background on, but it doesn't have to be a landscape. So I'm trying to include pictures of both landscapes and things that are not landscapes to give you ideas.